8. Mary Ann Moreno. 72-year-old Mary Ann Moreno was working at a Circle K gas station in Westminster, Colorado in 2020 when a man, later identified as Taylor Wimmer, asked for a free pack of cigarettes while holding a knife that was still in its packaging. Moreno refused to hand over the smokes and politely explained that she could get fired for giving things away. But then, after initially walking toward the exit, Wimmer suddenly rushed behind the counter and grabbed a pack of cigarettes. Reacting out of surprise, Moreno grabbed the man's arm and then pushed him. Wimmer fled the scene, and Moreno called her manager and the police. A customer who witnessed the ordeal told local station Fox 31 that Wimmer was acting scary and like he might be under the influence of drugs. The suspect would eventually be sentenced to 3 years of probation for multiple crimes, including the Circle K robbery. A few days after the incident, Moreno was fired from her job for violating the company's policy against chasing or confronting robbers by touching Wimmer's arm when he rushed up and scared her. After working for the company for 18 years, this one mistake cost her her job. Moreno filed a lawsuit against Circle K, which appears to be ongoing. Meanwhile, she seems to be winning the case in the court of public opinion, which seems to agree with her attorney's argument that the senior citizen reacted out of an instinct to protect herself, rather than a disrespect for the rules. 7. Keith Ireland. What began as an ordinary work shift at a convenience store in Jacksonville, Florida in 2010 took a sudden, terrifying turn for 56-year-old Keith Ireland, who was confronted by a knife-wielding robber. The suspect, later identified as a convicted felon named Jamie Butterman, ripped the cash register off the counter before Ireland managed to fight him off and chase him out of the store. Ireland threw a 2-liter bottle of soda at Butterman before jotting down a partial license plate number and calling the police. Thanks to Ireland's swift actions, law enforcement quickly caught up with Butterman and took him into custody following a brief chase. Police were even able to recover the cash register and the $275 that the suspect stole after he threw it out of his vehicle during the pursuit. Both the cops and prosecutor praised Ireland for his bravery, which they credited as a key to apprehending the suspect and solving the case. But Ireland's employer disagreed and instead fired him for leaving the store unattended, showing zero gratitude to the dedicated worker of 2.5 years who went far above and beyond the requirements of his minimum wage job. Ireland said that he would have been willing to accept disciplinary action for his alleged wrongdoings, but the company was unwilling to compromise. A spokesperson declined to comment on the matter, but local authorities made it clear that they thought Ireland deserved a reward rather than to have something taken away from him. Sadly, the loss of his job and his difficulty finding a new one left him in fear of losing his home, as he had no way to pay his rent. 6. Dr. Pavel Youtsis. In 2011, Dr. Pavel Youtsis began treating a 30-year-old woman at his clinic in Brooklyn, New York. The patient went to the clinic at the urging of a nutritionist who believed that she was suffering from a vitamin B12 deficiency. At the time, the woman was experiencing unexplained weight loss and other mysterious symptoms. Suspecting that she was suffering from more than just a vitamin deficiency, Youtsis urged the woman to get an HIV test, but she declined. Unable to shake the notion that something was seriously wrong, Youtsis allegedly ran the HIV test anyway. And his suspicions proved correct. The woman tested positive for the virus. Most experts would agree that the sooner HIV is detected, the better. And while receiving a positive diagnosis isn't good news, many, if not most, patients would likely rather know about it than not know, so that they could get the proper treatment. But Dr. Youtsis' patient was less than thankful when she went in for her next appointment and was informed that she had the disease. In fact, she was so upset that she sued the doctor for violating her privacy. The woman later told DNAinfo.com that she declined the HIV test because she already had a primary care physician. In the lawsuit, she claimed that she was never asked to sign a consent form for the test. She also accused the clinic's employees of violating her privacy by leaving her file open and chatting amongst themselves about her situation. In all fairness, New York law requires a patient's written consent for an HIV test, especially because the state keeps a database of all known HIV-positive patients and informs each person's known partners of the diagnosis. The woman had every right to reject the test, and UTSIS was legally obligated to respect her decision. At the same time, it's hard to fault UTSIS for doing what he truly believed was right, especially since an early diagnosis can be potentially life-saving. 5. Michael Turner. Pittsburgh resident Michael Turner was hanging out in the street one day in 2013 when a mentally disturbed homeless man named Leon Walls rushed up to them and stabbed his friend, Job Wright. Two of Turner's other friends chased after Walls on foot while Turner and Wright drove around searching for the suspect. As they pulled into a nearby Target parking lot, Turner and Wright reconvened with a member of their group, who ran out of the store and said that Walls was inside. Concerned for shoppers' safety, Turner entered the store with a baseball bat and ran up an escalator in search of Walls, who he found on the second floor. The two men exchanged words as Walls grabbed a young woman named Allison Meadows and stabbed her twice. Thankfully, Meadows survived, and Walls was quickly taken into custody by law enforcement. He'd later be found guilty but mentally ill for his violent actions that day, and is currently serving a 10 to 20-year prison sentence. Turner and his friends believe that they were doing the right thing by trying to stop Walls from hurting any more victims and preventing him from running away until the police arrived. And many civilians agreed, including Allison Meadows' father, Glenn, who credited Turner with saving his daughter's life. But Target officials saw the situation much differently. Instead of giving Turner and his buddies a pat on the back for springing into action, the company blamed Turner for the young woman's injuries and sued him, arguing that if he hadn't run into the store with a baseball bat, Walls would have never stabbed Meadows. Speaking with CBS News, Turner refused to accept blame for the violence, which he said was caused by Walls' decision to go on a stabbing spree, not his well-intended reaction to it. Meanwhile, Meadows and her family sued Target for allegedly failing to keep Allison safe and passing the buck to Turner. The cases were eventually settled for undisclosed terms. Turner told local station WTAE that he regretted taking action against Walls, and that he wouldn't do it again, stating, "It's not worth it. I see why people don't get involved." He unfortunately had a point, and was clearly relieved to put the situation behind him. 4. Veronica Cherwinski. As America's heroin epidemic gripped every corner of the country, 33-year-old Veronica Cherwinski found herself entangled in the throes of addiction. Even as she battled her own demons, she tried to look out for the safety of her friends and loved ones who were struggling with drug use, especially after losing a boyfriend to an accidental overdose. She even took a class on how to administer the opioid-reversing drug Narcan. In 2014, Cherwinski found another friend unresponsive on the floor of her apartment in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. She called 911 and held the woman's head up to prevent her from choking while waiting for paramedics to arrive. And thankfully, emergency responders got to the scene with enough time to administer a shot of Narcan, which saved the woman's life. After arriving at the scene, police spotted drug paraphernalia in Cherwinski's apartment and arrested her on a felony drug charge. But the case was later dropped under the state's Good Samaritan Overdose Prevention Act, which gives civilians immunity from drug charges if they're caught with anything illegal while trying to save someone from an overdose. Just a few months later, Cherwinski tragically passed away from an accidental overdose. Her close friend, Stephen Bukowski, described the troubled woman as having a big heart but a difficult life. When her addiction took over, she went from working as a nursing assistant who cared for the elderly to dancing in strip clubs to support her habit. Cherwinski got sober several times during her multiple prison stints. with the help of proper mental health care and medication. But in the end, she lost her battle against heroin, which doesn't discriminate and has claimed victims from all imaginable walks of life. 3. Tomas Lopez. Florida lifeguard Tomas Lopez was working at Hollandale Beach during the summer of 2012 when someone rushed up to his post and told him about a man who had swum out too far and was drowning. Lopez sprang into action and got the ailing swimmer to shore with help from a handful of Good Samaritans. The man received CPR and survived the ordeal, thanks to Lopez and others who wasted no time deciding how to react to the situation. Had a few more precious seconds slipped by, the incident could have had a much worse outcome. Instead of praising Lopez for doing his job, though, the lifeguarding company fired him for allegedly leaving his section of the beach unattended in order to address the situation at hand. Furious about the decision, Lopez's coworkers went to bat for him along with the community at large, who credited Lopez with saving the man's life. 2 of the lifeguards who stood up for Lopez were also fired, and 4 quit in a display of support for their terminated colleagues. The company was quick to apologize and offer the young man his job back, admitting that its supervisors acted too quickly in making the decision to fire Lopez. But he decided not to take them up on the offer, later telling the Florida Times-Union that he wasn't acting out of spite or hard feelings, but that he'd rather focus on his studies and move on with his life. The 2 lifeguards who were fired for defending Lopez and the 4 who quit were also offered their jobs back. 2. Thomas Robinson. While driving down a highway in Augusta, Maine in early 2022, Thomas Robinson spotted an overturned car along the roadside. He pulled over to check on the victim, which included a mom and her 2 kids. Robinson and another Good Samaritan got one of the children out of the car, and they were about to take the second child out when the mother began stabbing Robinson with a box cutter. The troubled motorist, later identified as 33-year-old Rashida Guest, was mentally unstable at the time. She reportedly told police that she attacked Robinson because she thought he was a demon. As soon as he realized he was being stabbed, Robinson threw his hands up to protect his face and backed away from the car. Both he and another bystander who pulled over to help were slashed in the face. And Robinson was left with damaged vision after undergoing emergency surgery to his eye. Robinson had recently moved back to Augusta after a house fire destroyed his home and dance studio in Atlanta. He later told local station WRDW that he was just starting to get on his feet when he witnessed the accident and stepped in to help. Despite the setbacks that he suffered from his injuries, he said that he'd stop to help someone in the same situation again in the future, even if it meant losing his vision completely. And while many members of the community hailed him as a hero, he said that he was simply raised to help those in need, and that it's just the way he is. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Arnold Abbott. In late 2014, a 90-year-old South Florida man named Arnold Abbott was arrested alongside 2 ministers for handing out food to the homeless on Fort Lauderdale Beach. The trio were charged with violating a new public ordinance that made it a crime to feed the homeless, and were each facing up to 60 days in jail and a fine of up to $500. While the ministers were back out in the community feeding the homeless later that evening, Abbott decided to play it safe immediately following his arrest. He told local station WPLG that he wasn't going to do anything to aggravate the situation, and that he was trying to work with the city, but that any human has the right to help his fellow man. The ordinance against feeding the homeless was accompanied by 4 other new laws that were meant to curb the homeless presence in the area. These laws included bans on leaving personal belongings unattended, panhandling at medians, and strengthened statutes against urinating and defecating in public. While it's understandable for the city's residents to expect a certain quality of life, Abbott and other activists argued that criminalizing homelessness wasn't going to solve the problem or make it go away. Abbott began feeding the homeless back in 1991, and his issues with the police began not long after. Following his 2014 arrest, he made it clear that he had no plans to stop feeding those in need. He even said that he'd be willing to go to jail if that's what it came down to. That same year, both the Congressional Hunger Center and the National Coalition for the Homeless named him as their Advocate of the Year. The elderly crusader unapologetically continued to stand up for his beliefs until his passing in 2019 at the age of 94.
9. Matthew Ware. While working as a lieutenant at the Kay County Detention Center in Oklahoma in 2017, Matthew Ware purposefully moved two black pretrial detainees, D'Angelo Wilson and Marcus Miller, into a cell block that housed known white supremacists. He then ordered for the cells to be unlocked, and as one would expect, the white prisoners attacked Wilson and Miller. Both men were injured, and Wilson received 7 stitches for a wound on his face. Several months later, in early 2018, Ware had been promoted to acting captain of the detention center. He punished a pretrial detainee named Christopher Davis for filing a written complaint about his methods by ordering 2 corrections officers to restrain the prisoner with his arms outstretched for 90 minutes. A statement from the US Department of Justice described how Davis's left wrist was cuffed to the far left side of the bench, while his right wrist was cuffed to the far right side, which caused injuries to the inmate. Ware's conduct later fell under FBI scrutiny, and in 2022, he was convicted of violating the civil rights of Wilson, Miller, and Davis. The jury found him guilty of depriving 2 pretrial detainees of their right to be free from a correctional officer's deliberate indifference to a substantial risk of serious harm, and of depriving a 3rd pretrial detainee of the right to be free from a correctional officer's use of excessive force. In the words of Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark, Ware abused his authority, violated the laws he was sworn to uphold, betrayed public trust, and dishonored the many brave correctional officers who do their job lawfully. As a result of his heinous actions, he was sentenced to 46 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. 8. Teresa Simmons. In 2022, an inmate at the Kent County Correctional Facility in Michigan filed a civil lawsuit accusing a behavioral health counselor of violating him in graphically disturbing ways during his time in lockup. 43-year-old Teresa Simmons was working at the jail as a third-party contractor when she allegedly had inappropriate contact with the prisoner on several different occasions. The handwritten lawsuit, which was filled to the brim with shocking allegations, described how the inmate first met Simmons when he was sent to the hole, a term that usually refers to solitary confinement. He claimed that the misconduct started when she slipped him a note stating that she wanted intimacy every time she visited him. In the inmate's words, "I didn't know what I was supposed to do." He went on to claim that Simmons often knocked on his door with her chest fully exposed and included a description of tattoos she had that would normally be covered by her work uniform. The prisoner also alleged that the counselor encouraged him to expose himself to her. She apparently confided in him that she was getting bored with her husband and even called the prisoner her personal slave. He said he was scared but felt obligated to do as he was told, and that Simmons was aware of his mental health struggles. Perhaps the most incriminating accusation in the lawsuit is the inmate's claim that Simmons acknowledged she could lose her license for the things she was doing and saying. The prisoner further stated that he didn't understand what a driver's license had to do with the situation, apparently not realizing that Simmons was acknowledging how her behavior could put her job as a social worker on the line. The allegations only got more disturbing and included claims that Simmons promised drugs and cigarettes in exchange for daily favors, along with detailed descriptions of the things she wanted the inmate to do. He sought $250,000 in damages as a result of the behavioral health counselor's actions. The prisoner also wrote that he still had some of the notes she'd given him and insisted that he had no reason to lie. In addition to being slapped with a civil suit, Simmons was criminally charged in connection with the case. A verdict has yet to be reached though, since both cases appear to be ongoing. 7. Hosea Lee Jr. In July 2021, federal prosecutors filed an indictment against Hosea Lee Jr., a Bureau of Prisons BOP officer, and drug treatment specialist who worked at numerous BOP facilities throughout his 7.5 career with the agency. He was accused of a long list of horrifying acts of abuse against 4 female inmates over a several-month period in 2019, when he was working at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, Kentucky. Lee's job at the center was to interview inmates regarding their substance use and assess their treatment eligibility and progress. He also led drug education classes and provided group and individual counseling to inmates who struggle with substance use disorders. According to the 14-count indictment, Lee studied his victims' emotional, physical, and psychological histories. Unlike regular officers, he had complete access to these documents, which he used to select the most vulnerable targets. His job position also gave him the ability to get inmates alone without arousing suspicion from other employees. Lee persuaded and groomed his victims with alcohol, cigarettes, and other contraband, including a medication called Suboxone, which is used to treat patients who struggle with opioid addiction. He then took advantage of the women in non-consensual ways, exploiting their weaknesses and intimidating them into staying silent about the abuse. The crooked counselor used threats, manipulation, and physical force to coerce his victims. Lee ultimately pleaded guilty to 5 counts of abusing a ward. In a defense sentencing memorandum, his attorney urged the court to consider the defendant's status as an Iraq war veteran with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. He also brought up Lee's honorable military discharge and his lack of criminal history, hoping that the judge would lessen his client's punishment. In the end, though, the judge honored the prosecution's wishes and sentenced Lee to 80 months or around 6.5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of post-release supervision. Court documents describe the sentence as an upward departure from the usual sentencing guidelines for the charges Lee pleaded guilty to, but it was a far cry from the 15 years he could have received. 6. Victoria Calogero. During her time working as a mental health counselor at a Vermont prison in 2017 and 2018, Victoria Calogero allegedly engaged in inappropriate contact with an inmate she was counseling on at least 20 occasions. Records obtained by VT Digger revealed that authorities began investigating in 2019, around the same time someone filed a complaint against Calogero. By then, she'd already been fired from her job for allegedly having a relationship with another prisoner. She was also under scrutiny by state licensing authorities, but wasn't criminally charged in that case. According to court documents, a prisoner had found out about the earlier relationship with an inmate and saw it as an opportunity to try getting contraband smuggled into the prison. He approached the man that Calogero was allegedly seeing and tried coercing him to persuade the counselor to get on board with the plan. However, Calogero and her secret boyfriend refused to go along with it, and word of the failed plot soon spread to the Department of Corrections. Calogero's security clearance was revoked as a result, and eventually she was let go from her position. But apparently that was just the beginning of her problems. After the allegations in the second case were brought against her, she was criminally charged. During the proceedings, she agreed to the temporary suspension of her license pending the outcome of the case, but made it clear that by doing so, she wasn't admitting guilt in any way. Calogero pleaded not guilty, but unfortunately, the outcome of the case is unclear. 5. Megan Woodham. The year 2023 didn't start out great for 30-year-old single mum Megan Woodham, who was put behind bars for smuggling drugs into a prison she used to work at and for using her home as a stash house for a drug ring. It all started when the former prison health worker from Cheshire, England, began sneaking ketamine to drug kingpin Daniel Doran, who was locked up at her workplace. After turning crooked, Woodham also began opening her home to members of a multi-million-dollar cocaine trafficking organization. According to the prosecutor, Woodham formed some sort of relationship with Doran, who used his illegally obtained cell phone to arrange the transport of drug parcels from place to place. Woodham's home apparently functioned as both a storage facility and a waypoint along these routes. Woody and 2 others, including Doran and a woman named Kelsey Higgins, were found guilty of conspiracy to supply cocaine and ketamine. Woodham broke down in tears when the judge handed her a 6-year sentence, even though she received a much lighter sentence than her co-defendants, who were jailed for 15 and 13.5 years. 4. Travis Mullins. All hell broke loose in Greenville, Tennessee, one evening in early 2020 when police responded to reports of a hit and run in the parking lot of a Lowe's home improvement store. Upon arriving at the scene, law enforcement was told that an off-duty corrections officer, later identified as Travis Mullins, had hit the vehicle of a woman he'd been dating. Mullins, who worked for the Cobb County Sheriff's Office at the time, returned to the scene wearing his work uniform and was armed with a gun. An officer managed to disarm him, but he escaped and grabbed another firearm from his vehicle. Mullins pointed the weapon at the responding officers, and one of them fired in self-defense, which resulted in his death. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released few details following the bizarre tragedy, citing an ongoing investigation. But the news came as a shock to Cobb County Sheriff Armando Fontes, who described Mullins as an honest and hard-working employee of 3 years and a dedicated family man. Fontes told local station WJHL that the 29-year-old loved his job, his children, and his family, and that his actions that fateful night were completely out of character. The sheriff said that Mullins was experiencing some personal issues at the time, which perhaps had something to do with the irrational decisions he made that night. Fontes acknowledged that Mullins' actions forced the Greenville police to defend themselves, but described him as a genuinely good person who would be missed by his colleagues. He also urged people not to judge him by one single action and one single event. On behalf of his staff, Fontes said that their hearts went out to everyone involved in the incident and that they were very glad nobody else was injured. 3. Xiomara Lobo and Della Savory Mayo. In 2002, a pair of former Miami-Dade County Corrections officers were nabbed by federal authorities for allegedly using children's social security numbers to fund what the South Florida Sun-Sentinel described as their free-spending lifestyles. Xiomara Lobo and Della Savory Mayo, who were both 32 years old at the time, were accused of stealing the identities of a 3, 12, and 14-year-old in order to pay for plastic surgery and other personal expenses. Their fraudulent activity dated back at least 7 years, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office. In early 1995, Savory Mayo allegedly got approved for an auto loan that she applied for using her name and the social security number of a 14-year-old. She fell behind on the payments and owed more than $15,000 when the bank repossessed the car 3 years later. Savory Mayo was also accused of opening 2 credit cards with a 12-year-old social security number. She then used them to pay for tummy tucks for herself and Lobo. Based on police reports, Lobo also opened a credit card using another woman's identity. She then tried getting a loan with a 3-year-old social security number, but was denied. In addition to all that, the pair allegedly racked up another $100,000 in debts that they never made payments on. As a result, they were charged with identity theft, which carries a prison sentence of up to 15 years and a fine of up to $250,000. However, it's unclear how the case played out or if the women were convicted. 2. Alex Toro. 47-year-old Alex Toro was working as a corrections officer in Beacon, New York, when he was accused of moonlighting as a drug dealer in 2022. According to authorities, Toro organized 4 drug sales with an undercover NYPD detective over a 5-week period. During one of his deals, he allegedly sold 250 grams of cocaine with an estimated street value of $9,500. He's also accused of telling the undercover cop that he had a chopper, which is supposedly another term for an assault rifle, and discussing the possibility of selling a handgun. A criminal complaint claims that Toro arranged 3 drug sales from his post at the Fishkill Correctional Facility in Dutchess County, and he had his siblings deliver the goods. During a search of his apartment, officers recovered 1,000 grams of cocaine worth over $40,000, as well as a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun, some ammunition, and $8,000 in cash. Toro is now facing 2 counts of felony drug sale and has resigned from his job, and at the moment, the case is ongoing. 1. Kayla Burgum. 27-year-old Kayla Mae Burgum was working as a corrections officer at a prison in Iowa when she was busted in 2022 for allegedly having a relationship with an inmate. The illicit pair supposedly hooked up on numerous occasions and in various places throughout the jail over a 7-month period, including in a utility closet and the facility's rec yard. Acting on an employee tip, the state's Department of Criminal Investigation launched a probe into Burgum's suspected misconduct. According to an arrest report, the affair began in late 2020 and lasted for 7 months. The pair allegedly had at least 3 intimate encounters, but authorities are remaining rather tight-lipped on the matter and haven't released any further details. Burgum resigned after falling under suspicion. She pleaded not guilty to 3 misdemeanor charges of misconduct with an offender and was released pending the outcome of the case, which appears to be ongoing.
If your doctor tested you for a dangerous but treatable disease without your permission and caught it in time to prevent any major long-term consequences, would you be grateful or would you consider it an invasion of your privacy? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.